Moving on to Europe. How about you introduce the featured matchup of Europe?
Sure. So the Europe, there will be 2 matches this week, that are playing on the weekend, as opposed to one earlier and then a break before the proper matches start with KT in Korea. The first match that we'll talk about is not actually the featured match. It's the one that happens on Saturday. It's Misfits versus Splyce. And I think most people really like this match and think that this is the more exciting and the closer match, but I just look at these teams and I just, like, both of these teams are a mess. Like, in a lot of different ways. And what I mean by this is Splyce right now, they've kind of gotten this really cute buff from Blade of the Ruined King, okay? Which is helping out Wonder's champion pool a lot. And not that Wonder has a poor champion pool, but he's, like, really good at these kind of champions since they were Dignitas EU and Challenger Series that play with the Blade of the Ruined King, and he can get a lot of lane advantages from that. And I think that frees up Trashy to do, like, the counter jungling style he likes to do on the top side. Suncooks is terrible at laning. Like, he's actually, it's really depressing because I think he's just, like, either afraid to take trades some of the time or things like this, but you want to get into a situation where you've taken that mid lane turret down. So what they do is they've used a lot of the pressure from Wonder to transition to mid, and then this opens up that for them and they can 1-3-1. Misfits don't respond well to top lane pressure. If they do try to overcompensate and use top lane pressure instead, then they lose bot lane really hard. So it's like, oh my gosh, someone's making a play top. We should scramble and make a play bottom, or vice versa. And then they get, like, a kill in exchange for 2 turrets or something. And it's really weird. So I think that this is an interesting match because there are so many different mistakes there, but I'm like, what do you think? Who's going to win this?
So in my notes, it says Splyce ? And so I did end up going with Splyce just because I think and maybe it's, again, I'll have to default to you on this because you've watched more, for whatever reason, I would always end up, I've missed like half of the Splyce games. Whenever I think of Misfits and Splyce's strengths, I think Splyce has a pretty good understanding of how to come together in the late game and where to apply pressure, like, as the series goes on later, but their weaknesses are in kind of early things like laning, 1v1 and 2v2 matchups and stuff like that. Whereas Misfits, I see as a bit more of the opposite. I think they're slightly more aggressive early, although that's kind of waned as the season has gone on. But I think that a lot of the time, their mid-game, I see them really struggling with what to do with their advantages and what to do next. Like, once they get the outer ring of turrets down, for example, like, where do they apply pressure? Where are they sending people? Why are they doing this? I think that kind of falls apart, and I think that's where Splyce, despite their mistakes, might be able to take an advantage and close out a game. I think they're kind of used to being behind as well, since like all throughout last year, that was kind of what they relied on, was just scaling. And I think the meta has shifted slightly, like, enough that it's a little bit more in their favor than Misfits right now.
Yeah, and I do think that Cacao has kind of reverted to the Cacao that people don't like to talk about because personally, I think Cacao is kind of overrated because of the fact that he is an extremely inconsistent jungler. And he'll have games where it's like, oh my gosh, Cacao is level 2 ganking and killing everyone, which seems to be the only thing people want to rate junglers on. And Cacao, when he invades, he doesn't necessarily think about what the enemy jungler is doing. He'll just go for those Krugs, right? He wants those delicious Krugs. And the enemy jungler has backed and will come and collapse onto him. So I think that this is a tricky point to bring up as well, because Trashy has come back to the old Trashy, who seems confident to invade the enemy jungler, who seems confident to counter jungle a lot and is thinking a lot more and is studying a lot more about what his enemy jungler is doing and pathing, and that's a big gap for Misfits, so that's something that they can take advantage of if they want to find an early lead as well.
Yeah, because I think I did pick Splyce. I think one thing that Misfits could do to kind of mitigate some of that, like, transitioning from early game into mid game, which is where I see, like, that's where a lot of their problems really stand out to me in terms of understanding where to pressure the map. I think if they do manage to unlock Ignar quickly, that will help them out significantly, because I think a lot of what they want to do early actually comes a lot more from Ignar's aggression, not Cacao's, especially to your point, since he's returned a bit to more of like a farming, keeping more resources to himself. So I guess I'm picking Splyce, but if Misfits are going to win, I think it's going to come off the back of Ignar and unlocking him.
And I do want to caution them, though, against what they seem to want to do is just unlock Ignar really early at the cost of, like, top and mid sometimes. They'll just pull everyone on the map, dive bot, and then at the same time, top laner will get, like, a huge farm advantage, and they won't know how to deal with that because they won't be able to trade sides effectively in mid-game. So, yeah, it's, like, kind of a weird situation where it's like, oh my gosh, we have to let Ignar roam. And then they can't compensate for the damage that they've done to themselves in response. Okay, but the matchup that I'm actually more excited for, that people seem to kind of think is just a wash, and I do think that there is a clear favorite here, is H2K versus Fnatic. The reason why I like this kind of matchup is because I think both of these teams are going to be the kind of teams that are, oh my gosh, we have a top lane teleport advantage. Let's lane swap, Let's go to the side lane and try to see if we can race to each other's bases. Things like this. So to me, this kind of matchup is going to be about lane assignments. It's going to be about tempo advantage. It's going to be about these types of issues. But then when it gets down to mid and late game is when it gets more interesting, because I think Fnatic are better at setting up flanks and team fights, and H2K are better at, like, maintaining good lane assignments. They don't sideline their AD carry as much when Baron's in play, things like this. So to me, this is like a really good, interesting clash of styles because they are so similar, and yet they have, like, very, very, very important differences.
Yeah, I had Soaz and Odo as kind of my matchup to watch from this, not because of the 1v1 matchup, but to your point, what both teams really like to do with those top laners, and additionally, how each team uses that pressure around the map mid to late game. I also think that, again, everyone knows Soaz's experience, but, like, at this point, Odo himself is a very experienced European top laner, and these are two tops that have been in multiple playoff situations, multiple international events. And I think that this is kind of, it sounds cliche, but this is kind of where Soaz really starts to shine, is in the off season. And I really want to see Fnatic use the pressure that he can create. And again, like Odo, similarly, in the beginning of the split, he was kind of saving H2K. Like, I have a very specific Shen game in mind where I'm like, holy cow, Odo is just, dragging them to the win, kicking and screaming because they keep taking these disadvantageous team fights. But anyway, those are the two players I want to see, not necessarily for the 1v1 top, but just I want to see how each of these teams use their top laners.
Yeah, and Shen is obviously going to be a contested pick because Shen is really strong in general, but both of these teams get a lot out of the Shen. I think, though, H2K will look more at some of the carry tops like Rumble and things like this than Fnatic do, who seem to be really weird about playing a side laning top laner. They would much rather have like a Lucian or a Kennen AD carry just hanging out and going bottom during Baron. It's just like, why is this happening? I don't understand.
It allows him to side lane better. He can just split. Take teleport reckless, do it. No.
Do it. I believe. No, I mean,
it would probably work. Maybe.
If you're going to pick Kennen, come on. Let's go. May as well. Who needs heal anyway? So obviously. Blade of the Ruined King, though. Speaking of. Yeah, so to me, this is going to be just a fun matchup to watch. I think that the mid lane is really interesting because I feel like where you can start talking about all these like cute strategies and the way that they like to play around the map and how it's really fun in that sense. But then you go to the mid jungle duos and you're kind of like, yeah, okay. Just the way that Febiven is able to keep pressure in lanes really strong. Like they will probably pick early game champions for him. Also because in the late game, if they can't pick like a side laning mid, I think this is a really big issue for H2K. So they'll want things that are good in laning phase anyway. And that combined with Jankos, who I think has really, really kind of blossomed since Worlds. And since a little bit before Worlds, where he kind of learned to not just like camp rush or to not just look for lane openings. He still doesn't counter jungle or use as much invade pressure as I think would be good, but he has good instincts for like the Raptor camp. He has good instincts for when he can go top, and Odoamna preps that way for him really well. Febiven preps that way for him really well. I think the communication in bottom lane is still an issue, and that's probably where Fnatic can get an advantage, is just having better control on the bottom side, even though Nuclear and Jay have improved. But the control that I think H2K gets out of having Jankos and Febiven working together, having mid lane constantly pushed out, will really, really shut down Fnatic's options and their ability to get advantages in multiple lanes. So I think that that's a huge point for them to consider when they look at setups and things like this.
Yeah. I picked H2K to win. This is kind of one of those matchups where I would be a bit more surprised to see Fnatic take it. For the reasons you said, I think Caps he has like really, really great showings and then some very poor showings. And I don't think, obviously they had a lot of internal issues and roster moves throughout the split. The mid jungle just isn't as strong based on time, as well as the two players for Fnatic are both very young, or young, in respective to the season, or how long they've played, rather. But I don't know, how shocked would you be to see Fnatic take this series?
I would be pretty shocked. I think I expect Fnatic to win a game, actually, just by taking advantage of, like, they're actually pretty good when it comes to Baron setup. I actually think that this is something that declined a little when they got Broxo over Amazing. Pretty much everything else got a little bit better in terms of how Broxo uses mid pressure and things like this, but just the Baron setup when their team fighting around Baron was pretty good, and I think that if H2K get desperate and if Fnatic ban well, they can be put in a situation where they have to pick like a mid that doesn't sideline well, and then they can get collapsed on by Fnatic, and that could be the way Fnatic take a game. But I don't really think that this will be a series that Fnatic can will be favorites to win, especially since I think Misfits kind of, I mean, the meme is that they let Fnatic pick the only two champions they can play, which are Kennen and Chen. But those obviously are Fnatic's strong champions. I don't think that's necessarily why Misfits lost. I think Misfits lost because those champions do the things that Misfits are weak about. But I think that H2K famously only choke draft in semifinals, right? So that's...
They got to make it through this round first.
Yeah, exactly.